Fortunato was an 8-year-old boy who lived with his parents. His father's name was Juan, his mother, Filomena. Both were always hard workers, and they had their coffee export company. They always taught their son the value of work and respect for others. Juan was a very distrustful person because many people only approached him out of interest. He only had one friend, named Heriberto, in whom he trusted 100%, without imagining that a few years later he would do this. Juan and Filomena were a young married couple living in the city of Palencia, in the country of Guatemala. They had known each other since they were very young, as their parents were close friends. Juan was a person who never gave up, and above all, he was very thrifty. He had few friends. The only friend he knew was called Heriberto, and he trusted him with closed eyes. While Filomena was a woman who, after finishing school, went to the capital to study something for 3 years because she was very interested in the export business. Better said, to sell everything that her country produced in order to generate money for her and make money for her country. Juan met Filomena at the age of 8. Their parents were great friends, and they even studied at the same school together. Little by little, a beautiful friendship began between them, to the point that Juan would pick her up from her house to go to school together. When they entered high school, at the age of 12, Juan would become Filomena's boyfriend and would meet a young man named Heriberto at school. Juan, besides being very reserved, was a young man who liked soccer very much, and because of that, he was called to represent his school's national team. Heriberto was a year younger than him, until one day he saw him and was impressed by the way Juan played soccer. He approached him and said, "You play soccer very well. Do you think I can be your friend?" Juan saw that Heriberto was very sincere and said, "Of course, no problem." Little by little, Juan began to trust Heriberto and even told him very intimate things. All the girls at school talked about Juan, but he didn't care, since he had a girlfriend. Heriberto was introduced at Juan's house, but his parents saw something in the young man's face that did not look good. His mother told him many times, "Son, be careful with that young man. He doesn't look good to me." And Juan answered, "Mom, what are you talking about? He's a good friend." Time went by, and the relationship between Filomena and Juan was no longer the same, because Juan spent more time with Heriberto than with her, and there were always problems of jealousy on Juan's part towards his girlfriend. "They told me that you are talking to men, and it was all Heriberto's invention to keep Juan away from his girlfriend." After finishing school, Heriberto went with his parents to the capital, while Juan would dedicate himself 100% to his parents' business. Filomena went to the capital to study for 3 years in a career where she could learn to export. Juan would talk to Filomena and told her that he loved her with all the strength of his heart and that he would support her in everything she did. So all that time that Filomena went to the capital, Juan would go to see her and support her so that she could finish her studies. When she finished her studies at age 23, Filomena got pregnant by Juan and returned to the city, where they both talked and started a project together to be able to export coffee to different countries that required it. Unfortunately, Juan's parents died in an accident due to the bad roads in that city. Juan, being the only son, inherited the little money his parents had and invested it with Filomena in harvesting coffee. The 6th month of Filomena's pregnancy would arrive, and Juan asked for her hand. She accepted, and both would get married in a very reserved way. The only guests would be the bride's parents. Filomena would come to live at Juan's house. Both began to manage the business very well. Juan began to be known, and each time the company grew more and more and needed a person of absolute confidence. By the 9th month, Filomena was having contractions, and that same day, he took her to the hospital, and the doctor told him, "Don't worry, Juan, she is in good hands." Juan fell asleep, waiting at the hospital, and when he opened his eyes, he was surprised to find Heriberto standing next to him and said, "What are you doing here?" Heriberto gave him a hug and said, "Juan, after so long I see you again, We were always friends. I want to know if you can give me a job. I heard that you are doing very well, and I find myself without a job. My parents died, and I'm here to see if you can help me." Juan saw him and said, "Of course I can. You're the only person I can trust." At this moment, Filomena gave birth to a beautiful little boy who was named Fortunato. Juan would invite Heriberto to live in his house because he had to take care of his wife and son. When Filomena saw Heriberto, she thought it was very strange, but in the end she ignored him. Time went by, and Heriberto began to manage Juan's business. He saw the exports and paid the staff. When Heriberto saw so much money, he couldn't take it anymore and began to take money from Juan, until at that point, Heriberto in his room had a plan. Since he always knew that Juan rode a horse every Sunday to relax. Early one Sunday morning, Juan said to Heriberto, "Heriberto, let's go horseback riding. What do you think?" Heriberto listened and said, "Of course I will." But the night before, Heriberto had already given the horse a medicine so that it would react in a bad way. It could jump very high and act in a violent way. Juan would mount the horse without imagining that after 15 minutes, it would react in a very abrupt way, throwing him 4 meters up and falling violently to the ground. Heriberto got off his horse, and when he touched Juan's pulse, he knew that he had accomplished his purpose. Filomena was devastated when she found out. People in the city began to say that Heriberto was to blame, since she had realized that he was a bad person. After the burial, Heriberto was left in charge of the company, managing Filomena's assets. Heriberto was not a good person, but his plans were to keep the company, so he said to himself, "I will have to make you fall in love to take the company from you." Heriberto began courting his best friend's wife for almost 5 years, and apparently for Filomena, he had changed. She was no longer the same person he knew at high school. The two gave each other a chance and would become sweethearts. Heriberto had succeeded. He was already living with her. The next step was to marry her, to have the company in his name, but there was a problem. It was little Fortunato, already 6 years old. Every time he saw Heriberto, he started to cry and told his mother, "Mom, I don't want you to be with him." And even when there were parties, the boy threw him out, saying, "You are not my father. Get out of here." Heriberto did not know how to get rid of the boy. He did everything possible to gain his trust, but the little boy did not give in, and so 2 years passed, and Heriberto decided to make a plan. His relationship with Filomena was going very well. So he said to her, "My love, what do you think if tomorrow we go for an early morning walk at the countryside?" Filomena agreed and said, "Fortunato, what shall we do with him?" And Heriberto said that they would take him, so that the three of them would go for a ride in a car, very close together. The next day, Filomena wanted to enlist Fortunato, but he said very bitterly, "Mother, I will not go with this man, who is not my father." Filomena would go down alone, and Heriberto would be surprised that the little boy did not want to go. Very nervous, he said to her, "Filomena, your son is not going?" She replied, "You know how Fortunato is." They both left in a car, without imagining that Heriberto had in store for him. The car he was driving, tires went down, and Heriberto got out to check to see that the road was very narrow. He pushed the car backwards, causing Filomena to suffer a tremendous accident. Heriberto thought he had accomplished his goal, so he called the police to report what had happened, and the policeman said, "The car's tires went down, and I got out to check, and the car went backwards." The people in town could not believe what had happened to Filomena. So Heriberto bought a crate, put stones in it, and did not let anyone see her. Fortunato was not told anything, and when they buried his mother, Heriberto called him and said, "Your mother had an accident and unfortunately died." Fortunato could not believe and said, "Where is she buried? Why my mother? Why my mother?" Heriberto took him and said, "Now I am in charge of you. Behave yourself, otherwise you will go to boarding school." The very sad child would stay at home with him, so his next plan was to do away with the minor. The little boy would be completely locked up and would not go out in the street. Until one time, he saw that Heriberto had had too much to drink, and he fell asleep. The boy took the keys and went to the cemetery with a pick and a shovel. When he arrived at his mother's grave, he alone began to dig and dig until he reached his mother's drawer. And when he opened the lid, he was surprised to find that there were only stones. The little boy went to the authorities to report what had happened, and they decided not to tell Heriberto anything and began a search and found Filomena in a house of some old people who were taking care of her. The elders said they had been taking care of her because they found her lying in a bar. She was taken to a hospital to recover, and thank God, she only had minor injuries. While Heriberto was taken to jail for robbery and usurping Filomena's identity. Well, dear friends, this is the end of this awesome story. We hoped you liked it. And if you liked it, give us a like and leave us your valuable comments so we can all read it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, we invite you to do so and to click on the notification bell so you'll always know when we have a new story. See you soon.